Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another stream on the channel. As you can see, we're switching it up again. Instead of doing a typical, Doki Doki Literature Club stream, we're going to be doing something a little bit special. So, as you can see by the title, I have been no stranger to the Fnaf Five Nights at Freddy's series. I've been no stranger to it. We've played the previous games on stream before, especially leading up to the Fnaf movie. We gave our review on the FNAF 1 movie. We talked about stuff on the FNAF 2 movie. So what we're going to be doing is, I've been no stranger to, talking about theories, share my thoughts on said theories, stuff that I agree with, some I disagree with, share my own theories. So I feel like, why not, since we have a PC now, why not catch up on some streams that I have not seen yet? These are from channels that, I watch on, a daily basis or whatever, of course, whenever they do upload, in the time frame of me getting the PC to now. So I'm like, you know what? Instead of just watching my own time and, having my thoughts, just in my head, in private, might as well share it to the world. Why not? So we have two series. I cannot talk. We have two theories on deck that we're going to react to. And yeah, let's just hop into it. And it's just going to be a calm, chill stream. Just we're going to have some fun. All right. People chattering outside. That's fun. I don't know if you guys can hear that. All right. Let's go.
The time is finally here. I've been making videos on videos of the full timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's and my process for making my own in-depth timeline. And like I mentioned at the start, I'm going to be using the bulletin board I made about more than a year ago when I tried to make a timeline without using any books, just the games up until Ultimate Custom Night. But because of what I just said, you realize this bulletin board is lacking in a lot of information. So why don't we make this bulletin board bigger? And now, let's add stuff to it. On today's video, we will be going over all the lore that I can pluck out from Help Wanted that I think is relevant for the timeline, and I'll be putting it on this board. I'll also be touching on Five Nights at Freddy's Special Delivery, the AR app, because after all, Help Wanted and Special Delivery kind of go hand in hand. Of course, we'll be adding security.
Honestly, you do need a pin board. Obviously, I'm not going to be talking over the video itself because there will be too much audio and you guys won't be able to hear that. You won't be able to hear my thoughts. You won't be able to hear the video as well. So we're going to pause it and share my thoughts and everything. But, like I said, obviously you do need a pin board at this point in the FNAF series. Like, there is FNAF 1, FNAF 2, FNAF 3, FNAF 4, FNAF World, whether you think that's canon or not, FNAF 6, Sister Location, Ultimate Custom Night, Help Wanted VR 1 and 2, AR, Security Breach, Ruin DLC from Security Breach. Eventually they're going to have an Into the Pit game. So there's so many games out there. And then you have the books as well. Maybe the movie is also canon in the timeline to help you solve everything. And what makes the game so confusing, and I don't know if I've said this on stream or if I just said this, just off camera, personal life or whatever, just reacting to theories and, coming up with my own timeline events and how I come up with what I think is canon in the series. The thing that makes the game so difficult to talk about from a theory perspective is that we have no idea when they take place and when they fit in the timeline. Like, for instance, we always thought that FNAF 1 took place and the pizzeria was open, the place that we, playing the game in FNAF 1, that setting of the FNAF 1 location at Freddy Fazbear's, the location, is in 1993 because of the hourly rate from the paycheck we get at the end of Night 5, right? And then FNAF 2 was a prequel to that because in the paycheck, it said, like, November, I think the day was scratched up, but it said 1987. Right? But nowadays, with so many games out there, and the timeline is way bigger than just like the first 3 games, now it's to the point where we don't know when those locations were actually in business. Like, yeah, we may play the Five Nights and, Five Nights at Freddy's 1, 2, or whatever have you, in 1987 or in 1993 or whatever the case may be. But that doesn't mean that location is open in 1987 or 1993, right? Like, as the movie taught us, like, the location could be open in the 70s, but they don't hire the security guard to go in there for 5 nights and work there as a security guard for decades later. So I feel like nowadays with so many games out there, that's what we're starting to think about the original games is they weren't open in the 80s and 90s. They were open way earlier. We just play as a security guard when that place has been closed down for decades. So it gets confusing. Introduction out the way. I just want to say that disclaimer out there.
Breach Ruin and Help Wanted 2 as well, but they'll get their own videos because I have a feeling this is going to take a while for these games. So for now, Slices, put on your aprons and let's do some lore scouting. And just one quick reminder, this bulletin board and its entire purpose is just to document factual evidence from the games with zero speculation. I think it's really important to ground yourself in what we know for a fact before we start speculating. So that's the purpose of this board. There's going to be things that we're all pretty 99% sure of, like the name Glitch Trap, that I won't be putting on this board for that very reason. Now, in case it's been a while since you've played,
even though Glitch Trap is very confusing, right? We know something exists that's named Glitch Trap, but that whole appearance, the, hand over, handmade sewn suit that we see in Help Wanted, it's confusing because we, as we know it, the whole entity that we as the community know as Glitch Trap, his identity has changed. Like, oh, is he the Mimic? Is Glitch Trap a version of the Mimic we see in the Security Breach Ruin DLC? Like, is that Mimic we see in the Ruin DLC an earlier version of what would later become Glitch Trap from Help Wanted? Is Glitch Trap, another version of William Afton, like he always comes back? Is it just William Afton's corrupted computer code that was put in the software? It's not a real person. It's just a software glitch. Hence, it's a literal glitch, right? So, like, the amount of identities that we as a community see Glitch Trap, and we still haven't come to a concrete answer, it gets confusing. But as you can see, I've been part of the series of Fnaf and, focus on the lore and everything for, I would say now a decade, because didn't the first game come out in like 2014 or whatever? And this is the stuff that's been in my head for a decade. So now I'm taking the stuff that has been in my brain for over a decade, and I'm now sharing it out to you.
Help Wanted, and to be fair, that game came out 5 years ago, almost to the day. Like, it's crazy how close this is coming out to the 5-year anniversary of Help Wanted. But I figured it's best to re-go over the story of the game and to refresh everybody so we're working on an even playing field. After all, back when we did the bulletin board for the Scott games, up until Sister Location, there wasn't really a story to go over, so we were able to do 2, 3, 4 games in one video because we just did the bullet points of lore. But Help Wanted onward, literally every single game has some semblance of a story. So we should go over them even if we don't directly put that story on the bulletin board. The story of Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted is very meta, actually. An in-universe Five Nights at Freddy's VR game is being made, and it just got sent to our company, which we are a video game tester at. And it's our job to make sure the game is playable and ready to be launched. But as we make our way through the video game, we find these glitchy cassette tapes that the previous game tester left in the files. As we play the game and collect them, we learn that these tapes were left to document what was going on behind the scenes of Fazbear and that previous company, and document what was going on within the game itself.
Yes. Because that's where the whole, cassette girl comes in with the tapes that, we picked up these, old circuit boards and, we were just told to, put them in the game and, don't worry about testing the circuit boards or whatever, just put them into the game because we have to rush this product out. And that's how we get to the whole Glitch Trap is a computer entity, a glitch, because he was in those broken circuit boards, right? So yes, 100%. But the whole thing about that is when it comes to the whole game testing stuff, as we know from the roller coaster introduction that was just playing, a rogue indie game developer, was hired by Fazbear Entertainment to make these games to, make the brand a lot more positive, right? And that's what these games that we're playing as. But it's like, so okay, so a rogue indie game developer was paid off by Fazbear Entertainment to make the image better. What games, this is something that I still to this day don't understand fully and I want to find an answer, is this is what always confused me. What are the games, the products that Fazbear Entertainment was referring to that diminish the brand? Are they the games that we've been playing since 2014? Is it something different? And what games are the ones that were rebranded to make the image of Fazbear Entertainment way better? That's something that, to this day, still confuses me about the whole rogue indie game developer paid off Fazbear Entertainment. Right? What is that exactly? Because it's a big deal.
After all, they warn us of something that the girl who recorded them calls the anomaly. And as we collect these tapes, that anomaly we're being warned about grows stronger, more clearly visible, and closer to us. As it comes into view, it appears to be a stitched-together felt costume styled to look like a yellow bunny. And that's much of the game. You play these minigames and you collect tapes to then see this image more clearly. Playing through the games, we encounter 3 different endings. Well, kind of 4. The main basic ending you get if you beat every single minigame and every single hard mode version of those minigames, after which you unlock something called Pizza Party. It's a weird, confusing maze of a level where you're going through all these different set pieces, and eventually you get to the end, where your reward is the back room of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, or at least something that looks like it. The curtain moves and you're beckoned behind the curtain by the anomaly, and it's here that you can get one of 2 endings. The main ending here, and the only ending with this branch for quite some time, is you listen to the anomaly and go behind the curtain. And once you do, it fades to black, and it fades up, and the anomaly is dancing to the Freddy's game performing a song, and you realize you're looking from the perspective of Freddy Fazbear. The implication here being that you got stuffed into the Freddy Fazbear animatronic suit. However, when the Curse of Dreadbear DLC launched, another ending was added to this game. In this room, there's a fire exit that opens up and snow comes in of. If you go out that door, you can see the Pizzaplex being built across the street, and you're just in the middle of nowhere in the snow. Notably, this does imply that the Pizzaplex is built in the middle of nowhere surrounded by trees. The third possible ending.
At the time, that's what we thought, right? I didn't realize that was the curse. I'll be honest, I did not realize that snow, seeing the building outside, the construction outside. I didn't realize that was the Curse of Dreadbear DLC. I thought that was the Christmas holiday themed DLC, since the snow environment and everything. I thought that's when we saw the building construction outside, which obviously was teasing the pizza plots that we know in Security Breach and the Ruin DLC. Now, at the time, I agree with that. My only problem is, fuck, I just lost my train of thought for a second. Oh, that's right. So my only problem with that is, at the time, we thought that the Pizza Putz was indeed being built in the middle of nowhere because that's what we saw. But as we know, that's not the case. The Pizza Putz was built on top of the burned, rundown pizzeria similar Fnaf 6 building, which was also connected to the sister location bunker. And as we know, the sister location bunker is connected to the FNAF 4 house. So the Pizza Putz is not being built in the middle of nowhere. The Pizza Putz is connected to FNAF 6, sister location, and the FNAF 4 house, all in one, connected unit.
Is available if you collect every single hidden cassette tape in the games, in which the last one gives you the instructions to access this ending, where essentially you are warned that now that you've collected all the tapes, anytime you enter the lobby, there's a random chance that the anomaly will try to merge with your mind, and the tape gives us instructions that if we press a button, turn a lever, and I think pull a crank, essentially we can eliminate the anomaly. Once this eventually does happen, you have 2 choices. You either listen to those instructions or you don't. If you don't listen to the instructions or you do it incorrectly, you'll see your perspective begin to shift with the anomaly until you're looking at yourself at the computer. And then the game fades to black and you get the game over screen. Presumably, the anomaly took over your mind, and you're just put right back in the game. However, if you do the steps correctly, it doesn't get much better. Instead, you're transported into this metal doored room with a lock and handprints of some someone trying to escape, and then the slide opens up to reveal the anomaly on the other side, who shushes you and fades into the darkness. It's escaped, essentially. That's ending number 3. But I mentioned we kind of have 4 endings. The Curse of Dreadbear DLC added something that feels very final, like another ending almost. Essentially, after the 3rd ending, you get a plushie of the anomaly that's all glitchy and messed up. And in the Curse of Dreadbear DLC, there's a corn maze where you collect a key and find a matching gate to leave. However, if you collect all 4 keys and then one final secret 5th key, and then make it back to the center of the maze, you can get under a secret hatch, and inside is a workshop with a white rabbit mask. You collect that mask and then you can summon it in the lobby. Once in the lobby, if you hold that glitchy anomaly plush and put on that rabbit mask, you'll hear our player having a conversation with the anomaly. Now, you can't hear the anomaly speaking, you can only hear yourself speaking, but we hear her say this.
Yes, I hear you. I know. No. There's no miscommunication. I understand. Yes, I have it. I made it myself. I think you would like it. No, no one suspects anything. Don't worry. I'll be ready. And I won't let you down. It will be fun.
Man, the amount of disappointment that I'm feeling right now listening to this is crazy, right? The hype we got when this ending, I guess we can call this an ending. The amount of hype that we got in the Curse of Dreadbear DLC when we saw this mask, it was connected to the glitch trap William Afton, glitch with the green, glitching bunny and everything, and we heard this text and everything. The amount of hype we had for this mysterious new villain character that would turn out to be Vanessa, right, was crazy. It was ridiculous. It was like, okay, finally there's a new chapter of the Fnaf timeline, the new Fnaf saga, where William Afton's story is done. It's now this new villain character is now the main antagonist. And to have all the hype and everything, and for it to be turned into nothing and to be reset is very disappointing. It went from, we are very, very hyped about Vanessa as a new big bad, the new villain of the series. William Afton's story is done. He was locked in HE double hockey stick. He was locked in hell with an Ultimate Custom Night. And now it's Vanessa Vanny as the new main villain. And we all know what happened. They got more appearance in the Security Breach trailer than the game itself. And their story was now being put to rest. I guess if we take the Princess Quest games at their, literal meaning, Vanessa is now done, and now Cassie is the new Vanessa Vanny antagonist, I guess, which that was not the plan to begin with. So it feels cowardly to set something up and then within a year or two to completely reset it and go back to square one.
While yes, it's technically speculation, I think it is incredibly safe to assume that the thing she made is this rabbit mask and perhaps a full costume, and that the anomaly is preparing us for something. So that's the story of Help Wanted 1. But what lore from this game is relevant to the timeline and we should put on the bulletin board? Well, let's go over that. A lot of the important lore of this game comes from the cassette tapes that you can collect while playing. But instead of just playing all 16 cassette tapes, you can find that elsewhere on YouTube, we'll just go over the important points. First of all, one incredibly important piece of lore, possibly the most important piece of lore from this game that affects the whole timeline and the bulletin board itself, one of the tapes lets us know that the whole purpose of the in-universe Fnaf VR game that we are playing is Fazbear's attempt to make fun of itself and make light of the past after a rogue indie developer.
What I was just saying, how Fazbear Entertainment hired a rogue indie game developer to poke fun at their, childish ghost stories and their bad PR image, and it's about to rebrand for a new, reboot, so to speak. So yeah, that's what I was saying earlier, and that's one thing that, to this day, is very complicated to talk about from a timeline lore perspective, because what are the games they're talking about when it comes to that tarnish the brand? What are the games that the rogue indie developer made after being paid off by Fazbear Entertainment to make the brand a lot more PR family friendly? Right? What are those games? How does it all fit? How does it affect FNAF's legacy, literally?
Made a series of games tarnishing the brand. Essentially, it's Fazbear being like, yes, haha, we get it, we're kind of scary, look, let's leave that in the past and move on. But one of the tapes lets us know that Fazbear themselves hired that indie developer to make those games based off of real events in order to discredit those claims and do some elaborate cover-up. Well, bye. So we'll mark both of those down, that the indie games exist and that this VR game exists, both of which are an elaborate cover-up to cover up the past. We should also note what I said earlier, that most of the lore comes from the perspective of...
Alright, let me read these. Fazbear then hired a VR company to make a full game based around those smart games to show the public that they can make fun of themselves a bit and realize that isn't actually real, a lie. Yeah, because in the speech in the beginning of the game, the roller coaster, talking about when he first heard about the rogue indie game developer, it was like someone like most of the stories are, childish or inaccurate or not true or whatever, right? Like most of it was fabricated. That's what it is. Most of the stories were fabricated. So it's like, okay, most are fabricated, so part of it was true. Most lore is delivered by a game tester recording her findings and audio logs that she's placed in the game, Tape Girl, in the hopes of saving the next tester who tries the game. Talked about not some of the tapes because as you assemble the tapes, that's when the glitch trap virus appears and takes you over, and then, well, you either get stuffed, you get trapped in that room, they repossess your body and you see them walk away, right? Whatever have you. It's all bad endings. Fazbear secretly hired an indie developer to make small games based off the real events that happened in the Fazbear franchise so that they could publicly denounce those real stories as a witch hunt. Yes.
The previous game tester of these games. Other information we get from those logs is that Fazbear sent over old, or as is said differently in emails we'll get to, vintage technology to scan into the system to find some kind of usable code. And they do, but after doing so is when the anomaly began to show. Much of you already know this as the story of the creation of Glitch Trap, but again, this bulletin board is just directly stated or shown information about the games. So technically, they never say Glitch Trap in this game. I won't be saying it on this section of the bulletin board. The first tester, Jeremy, lost his mind while dealing with the anomaly, culminating in some sort of incident. Now, we don't get any specific details about what happened, but these are the quotes that illuminate what most likely took place.
There has to be a lawsuit. There's no way there isn't. It happened in this building just a few doors down from me. Have you ever heard of a guillotine paper slicer? It sounds made up, but it's an actual piece of office equipment. I didn't even know we had one in the supply room. Jeremy used to do design work. I guess that's how he knew it was there. The supply room was lit. I didn't even notice Jeremy standing in the testing room as I walked past. The supply room was so bright, glowing from all the way down the hall. There was something that looked like a Halloween mask laying on the floor. I didn't understand. Ink must have spilled.
A Halloween mask lay on the floor. Ink must be spilled. That's not ink. That ain't no Halloween mask, right? A guillotine paper slicer, a mask on the floor, quote unquote, ink must be spilled, right? Jeremy was going crazy because of the glitch virus in the VR headset, corrupting his mind and everything. What happened, as we've always interpreted, is the guillotine paper slicer was Jeremy sliced off his face, and the mask is his face, his head, and the ink being spilled, well, that's kind of his blood.
I couldn't see his face. He had the visor covering his head. He had ink spilled on himself as well. The front of his shirt looked black in the dark room.
Yeah, this is a big point of speculation. For a while, I thought that Jeremy cut off his own face to get out of the VR helmet, but that doesn't quite make sense for a few reasons. First of all, the Halloween mask and ink that the cassette girl first sees is in a brightly lit room. You would think if it's a human face and blood, she would have known. I can excuse the ink on Jeremy.
I mean, maybe, but let's face it, when it comes to like Halloween masks, whatever, like you can make a humanoid Halloween mask, right? And then not know of, is that a Halloween mask or is that a person's face, right? Like typically actual IRL, Halloween costumes and everything, they have masks and everything, and some of them have pretty humanoid looking masks and faces. So from a distance, you can see, is it a mask or is it a person's head? So I don't know if I agree with that.
Being blood, because he's in a dark room, she can't really fully see him. But ink on the ground in a brightly lit room has to be ink, so is all of it ink? Well then, what's the Halloween mask? Why did he need the guillotine paper slicer? I
also think the whole ink thing be on the floor, I've always thought it as a rating system similar to the cut dialogue in Security Breach, where it's like, you're bleeding or you're cut badly, or it's something like that when Gregory is in Glamrock Freddy's stomach catch the first time and they're downstairs, and it's before they go into the medical charging suit and you see Vanessa for the first time. It's like there was a cut dialogue of Freddy saying like you're cut, or I'm detecting blood, you're cutting badly. It's something like that. And I think it was cut. My interpretation's always been it was cut because of an ESRB rating to make it child friendly. I think the ink is the same thing, where you don't want a game that's child friendly with Fnaf and everything, because let's face it, a lot of the audience is kids and everything. I understand that. I don't know if parents would be okay with a kid playing a game. Sure, there's like horror stories and everything, but having a kid hear about a character's face was cut and there's blood dripping on the floor from an ESRB rating system, I don't know if parents would be too happy with that. So that's why I think they said mask and ink, because hey, it could be anything, rather than making it too graphic.
Not sure. Not to mention, if he cut off his own face to get the VR helmet off, why is he still wearing it after his face is on the ground? Like, it just doesn't add up. Regardless, something happened with a guillotine paper slicer that led to a lawsuit. Or what was supposed to be a lawsuit. Moving on, it's important to note that Fazbear reclaimed all of the technology that was scanned into the game after it had been scanned in, overnight seemingly and without permission. It just disappeared one day. As we collect the log cassette tapes, she notes that the anomaly begins attaching itself to them, forming an anchor into the game for itself. But when she notices this, she makes the decision to fragment her logs in order to keep the anomaly at bay, essentially splitting up its pieces so it can't be put back together. And then she records one additional log, a new one reintroducing herself and warning us to either abandon development or make sure these tapes are not found and put back together. So it's notable that the last tape completely changes course and says to collect all of the tapes and follow specific instructions.
Yeah, Tape Girl changed her instructions because there's, let's see, until 16, yeah. Because there's 16 torches in Princess Quest. Yeah, so there's 16 tapes you collect in Help Wanted 1. Now there's 2, right? Help Wanted 1. So there's 16 tapes you have to collect. And for like, it's either 14 or 15 of the tapes, Tape Girl talks about the whole, corrupted circuit boards, don't put the tapes together. She is splitting them all off because she wants the tapes to go under the radar in very small files so that Fazbear Entertainment doesn't detect what she's doing. Because she warns you about not assembling the tapes, because she feels that once you assemble the tapes, that's when Glitch Trap appears and corrupts your mind or whatever. Because she's seen that happen to Jeremy, and she also nearly saw it happen to her. So she's warning other future people who play this game and collect the tapes, hey, don't assemble the tapes. But either in the 15th tape or the final 16th tape, she changes tune, and it's like, oh, there's a way for you to beat the glitch trap virus. You have to assemble all the tapes together, and that will allow you to defeat them. So she changes course to being like, don't assemble the tapes, but then the final tape, assemble them. And we, as the fans, always interpret that as she was taken over by the virus, and now it's giving you the push of being like, hey, this voice you always heard throughout this game, now she's telling you to assemble the tapes. You trust her, right? Which is playing into Glitch Trap's hand.
People believe this tape to be recorded by the anomaly. Now, I won't be putting that speculation on the bulletin board, but what we can put on the board is that the last tape completely changes course and tells you to do something different, and that the first words we hear the anomaly say are direct copy, or mimic, hint hint, of the first tape we hear.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Then further, for information on the anomaly, like I mentioned earlier, it resembles a felt suit styled to look like a yellow Bonnie, and it grows more clear and closer to the player the more tapes we collect. It should also be noted that even after we destroyed the anomaly, we're able to have a conversation with it as the player. And it also seems like the anomaly is preparing us for something. And that's the main lore of Help Wanted, but there is a lot more lore to go over still. Mainly lore just from the game and context itself. For instance, we know that this VR game is based off of in-universe indie games based off of the company. But by using the titles of certain games, the locations, characters, and even gameplay, we can assume these indie games are essentially FNAF 1 through 6, like the IRL FNAF 1 through 6. 1, 2, and 3 are fairly straightforward. Their titles are literally in-game. 4 makes a lot of sense because Night Terrors is essentially recreations of gameplay of FNAF 4. Next, I hear you, what about Sister Location and Pizzeria Simulator? Sister Location gets tricky because we don't have a lot of direct recreations of Sister Location gameplay, but what we do see is Ennard show up 2 times. By all accounts, Ennard should have only ever been seen by Michael. It's something that forms in the Sister Location bunker away from public view, enters Michael, and then escapes into the sewers when his body falls apart. Only Michael should know about this creature. So the fact that it's in-game and faithfully recreated implies that it is a Fazbear character. And if it's a Fazbear character, then that would mean this game has to exist, because how else would the public know about Ennard?
Same thing with, I hope he doesn't bring it up because I'm noticing a trend where I'll pause it, say my piece, and within a minute or two later, it will get brought up in the video. So I hope I don't repeat what's about to be here in the video. This is the first time I've watched this, by the way. But it's the same thing with Ennard. It's the same thing with Nightmare Fredbear and the Nightmare animatronics, but really specifically Fredbear, because Fredbear appears in Help Wanted VR1. And as we know, whether it's you believe it to be sound illusion discs that, create the Nightmare Trunks, it's basically a hallucination, right? Some way, the character we play as in FNAF 4, which we all interpret to be Michael Afton, was so traumatized and created these nightmare, horrific versions of the Nightmare Trunks and Fredbear. For Fredbear to appear again in a faithful recreation in Help Wanted VR tells me that Michael is connected, right? Because how else, no one else knows about the Nightmare Trunks. No one else sees the Nightmare Trunks as nightmares. Because I think that also happens in the books as well, where, when we first hear about sound illusion discs, everyone is able to see the animatronics as, what they are, just, plain old, cuddly, friendly animatronics. But a couple characters knows the sound illusion discs, and it causes them to change their perception of what they believe to be true, right? So they're literal illusions. So, the only way Fredbear appears in VR, Help Wanted, right, as we play, the person had to have also seen Fredbear in that form in FNAF 4, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense for you to see Fredbear as the glowing, cuddly guy in FNAF 4 before him to be turned into a horrific version in VR. No, he had to have seen Fredbear, right, in his form. And you also see it in the security logbook book. How he says that he's seen the nightmare version of Fredbear.
The same logic can apply for Pizzeria Simulator. There is no gameplay of Pizzeria Simulator shown in Help Wanted. However, there is a plushie of Scrap Baby. Scrap Baby again being a character that isn't a real Fazbear character. It's the result of Circus Baby trying to rebuild herself after splitting off from Ennard. And it's something that only Henry, Michael, and maybe a few other people should have seen. Not a well-known Fazbear character that has merchandise. So if that character is known to the public, that implies Pizzeria Simulator is a game. And that's doubled down with the books that we will get to, but in those books, Pizzeria Simulator is literally name dropped. So, you know. But I hear that some of you think I'm saying Help Wanted is saying every game before now is fake and you shouldn't listen to it. And I'm not saying that, and neither is Help Wanted. It should be noted, and I'm putting it on the bulletin board, that Cassette Girl literally explicitly states that these games were recreations of real events that did.
Because the title's gameplay or characters present, we can assume that the indie games made based on real events of Fazbear Entertainment include the IRL games Fnaf 1 to 6. Note, she explicitly states these games are about real events that did happen, and this is all an elaborate cover-up to conceal the truth by showing it and calling it outlandish. The implication is that those games are still haven't been able to be accurate. Yeah, agreed. I mean, this is just stuff we've talked about this entire stream so far, is when they say the whole rogue indie game developer, and they were paid off by Fazbear Entertainment to make games to, make light of what happened and to, cover up, the skeletons in the closet, so to speak. We're all like, okay, well, what games are those, and what games can still be canon?
Did happen. It's not saying these games didn't happen. What I think Help Wanted is trying to tell us in this moment, and I think it's pretty explicit, so I'm willing to put it on the bulletin board, is that these games did happen. However, they are made by an unreliable narrator, so certain details might not be accurate. The meta of this is that I think Steelwell and Scott are telling us, hey, we want to continue this story, but if something we say currently contradicts something we said previously, trust the current over the original 6 games. I think that's all that this is saying, and I think that's a fair ask. Keep in mind, some of these games are 10 years old and were made in 3 months, Some other interesting lore that we should point out can be found within actual levels of the game. In the blacklight mode...
That's another thing that's a problem, and... look, I don't know how much Scott is attached to Fnaf still, because obviously, he had the retirement and he's no longer making games anymore, which, I've said my spiel, I've said my opinions on that whole experience, that whole saga of Scott leaving the Fazbear community and being dumped by his own fan base, but you know what? We've talked about it. That's a whole nother can of worms I'm not getting into. I've talked about it on previous streams, so I'm not trying to repeat myself. But that's the whole thing about, making a story, building up and everything, and then retconning it later on because, now we'll just change this up. It's, similar to what I said about the whole problem with the whole Vanessa Vanny treatment, where they were clearly setting up Vanessa to be the main antagonist after William Afton. William Afton's story's done. It's now Vanessa. And for her to not get any attention in Security Breach, well, now the new Vanessa's there, and it's Cassie, right? So it's like, okay, well, that may be what Steelwolf's focused on now, but that's annoying because that was not the game plan. You were setting up Vanessa Vanny to be the main antagonist, not Cassie Vanessa, right? You weren't set up that way, so, if you're setting someone up, we expect to have some payoff or some conclusion, right? And that's what makes the whole timeline FNAF confusing, if it's not confusing already, is the whole thing about, retcons. Because as we know, there is like one time that Scott has retconned something in FNAF. And what I believe the retcon... I could be wrong about this, you may think differently, but what I've always thought that retcon to be is in FNAF 4, where people always thought, oh, was that the Bud of 87? and the end of night 5 where the crying child gets shoved into the mouth of Fredbear, then gets bit, we always assumed that was a bite of 87 because that was the first on-screen, death that involved a bite, right? So it's like, well, you hear about a bite of 87 since, 2014. Well, a year and a half later, here's this game that's very clearly showing a bite in this big, important moment. That has to be the bite of 87. Well, obviously, that was bite of 83 because of the, Fredbear and Friends TV show. And it was further proved because in the sister location bunker in the secret night, you typed in 1983 and the cameras showed the Fnaf 4 house. So that was Scott's way of showing, it was 1983, 1987. Similar to his quote where he said, sometimes my intentions aren't very clear, and in those moments, I have made it clear in the next game to make my intentions more clear. Hence, we all thought it was 1987, but in the very next game, we typed in the code 1983. Hence, Scott's intention of that bite being 1983, 1987. Which, we still haven't seen the bite of 87. We have no idea if that's even real. But that's what the whole retcon thing, to me, it's a double-edged sword, right? Retcons can help. Retcons can make your story better, right? They can help. But the problem is, to me, and this goes for anything, if you rely too heavily on retcons, if you are so focused on retcons and you don't really have a plan of a story, middle, and end for your story, then that's where you can lose your audience, and that's where you can start to make all these empty promises. There's no payoff, and people just get frustrated because, okay, well, you introduce this idea, it goes nowhere because you retcon it later, right? It's the same thing with the MCU, kind of similar in the same way with the whole multiverse problem, where, there's no stakes to the multiverse because you're showing the audience that, it doesn't matter if this character dies or this character, doesn't match up with like the comic book accurate, side that you would expect because it's another version, it's another variant. And, it doesn't matter that Kane the Conqueror, died in, Quantumania because, well, there's a billion other variants out there. So one of those billion other variants you see will be the new big bad in the Kane dynasty. If Disney's even doing that, because obviously Jonathan Majors was booted from the project. So the MCU, Disney has no plan. But it's kind of the same thing where if you rely too heavily on retcons and you don't have a plan, that's where people get frustrated because it feels like there's no point in getting invested when you're just going to change shit up in a month. If you introduce something, audiences expect there to be a payoff. Hence, that's where the whole Chekhov's gun term comes into play. Where I've said this before, Chekhov's gun, I think I said this in my Security Breach playthrough, she must plug out the way, but the Chekhov's gun stuff it comes from play, it comes from theater, where if you see a gun on set during the play or whatever, you expect that gun to be used at some point during the whole runtime of the performance. And if it's never used, then there is no point in having that gun to begin with, right? You expect everything that's shown or mentioned to have a payoff or be used in some way, because otherwise there was no point in bringing it to begin with. And I feel like FNAF really walks that tightrope, where some things they get brought in and they do have a payoff, other things feel like, okay, well, you brought this in and there is no payoff and it feels useless, feeling, building this up and everything, people get excited for it, and to ultimately feel let down. Vanessa Vanny is one of those letdowns for me. I feel like other people share the same opinion.
Of entered vent repair, there is a furnace at the bottom of the level, outside of which there are Funtime animatronic shells, and inside are Endo 01 and Endo 02 endoskeletons. Somebody separated that pile to find about 4 animatronics worth. I think this is incredibly important, but I will keep my mouth shut until we get there. I did make a whole video about specifically that you can watch right here, though. The pizza party level is strange and worth pointing out. I mean, I'm not sure even if this is the intended original ending for the in-universe Five Nights at Freddy's VR. It literally might be something created by the anomaly. After all, it's more of a rehash of other things already present in the game and some weird warehouse bits. It's almost like it was mimicking the game. And finally, for Help Wanted,
I honestly think the canon ending for Security Breach. I honestly think the canon ending for VR Help Wanted 1 is the whole Curse of Dreadbear ending with the Vanny mask, right? Because clearly that's what was talked about. That's what was set up. We get into that the whole thing, the whole spiel a few minutes ago. That was what was set up. Was Vanessa being the new big bad. That has to be the canon accurate ending for the series because that's what people are going to be diving into later on. The pizza party ending, getting stuff in the suit, the ending where you get corrupted and you're on the stage because your mind was taken over by Glitch Trap. Or the one where you're locked in that room, the little key vault, the safe. I feel like those are all just, simple callbacks where it's like, hey, remember Glitch Trap, the guy who we all thought at one point was just another, costume change of William Afton? Hey, remember how William Afton in those 8-bit sprite minigames was stuffing kids into suits? Well, here's a recreation of that in Pizza Party, right? Similar to how, as we see in VR Help 101, it's recreations of all these games that we played for years. I feel like Pizza Party is kind of that same deal.
Curse of Dreadbear DLC takes place within Fall Fest of 1983. This is a completely new event that we still have little to no information on, but it's worth pointing out that this depiction of Fall Fest takes place next to a large red lake surrounded by trees with the Fnaf 4 house in the distance, and that Dreadbear can be seen leaving the lake and entering the barn. So that's all the relevant lore I could pluck out of Help Wanted, but we are not done yet. Like I mentioned at the beginning, there's another game with lore that's relevant to bring up now, because what it lacks in quantity of lore, it makes up for in quality. FNAF Special Delivery AR has a lot of incredibly important lore, but it's lore that goes hand in hand with Help Wanted and Security Breach, and outside of this lore, there's not much else here. So there's like 4 points, but they are incredibly important points.
AR is frustrating. I would say, if I'm being honest, the title used to be FNAF 4, as far as like the most frustrating game to talk about from a lore timeline perspective of what's real, what's part of the story, and what isn't. Right? FNAF 4 is still to this day very confusing. People still don't know what any of that game means. But to me, AR Special Delivery is the most frustrating because you have stuff like the emails where we first hear about Vanny's, insanity, how they are, becoming a threat. They are being corrupted by William Afton. They are, getting in trouble at work because they're typing stuff in Google where it's like, how to, view like, it's like butterfly migration patterns or something like that. But then the very next day, she's typing the word help, or she's typing how to sever human limbs without losing consciousness or whatever. So you have that stuff, which is all great from a lore perspective, but, the characters themselves can't be canon. They can't be important to the story. Like, Statue of Liberty, Chica, Toxic Fotsy, Circus Clown Bonnie, Wooden Tree, like Freddy, like, the Clockwork Ballora. Like, there's no way, like, those characters are actually part of the series, because I refuse to believe that, because that just gets even more complicated than it already is. So that's number one. The characters, like, there's no way they're canon or part of the series at all. They're just made up characters just to, add roster spots. Right? I feel like everyone has that opinion. But the second thing is FNAF AR, it's deleted. It's wiped off the face of the earth. Like, you cannot download FNAF AR on iPhone, on Android, iPad, if people even use those anymore. Like, you cannot download FNAF AR. It's been wiped off the face of the earth, of the App Store, the Google Play Store, everything. It's been wiped off the face of the earth. Is it... I don't know if it's Linux. Who are the developers? Hold up, let me see. 1 second. Who were the developers of the FNAF AR? Hold on. Illumits. Also, I don't think it's Linux, because that doesn't sound right. Yeah. So it's Illumits. So Illumits are the team that developed and made FNAF AR. But they wiped off face earth, because if you go to, their website, or you go to, the games that they've worked on or whatever, there is no mention of FNAF AR. Like, the developers themselves even wiped off that game of the face of the earth. So, it's like, do we even talk about FNAF AR at all from a lore timeline perspective? Because, yeah, there are some details, like the emails and everything. But the fact that the developers themselves even wipe off the face of the earth, it's like, okay, well, what do we do? Do we care about it? Do we not? Do we talk about it? Do we not? Like, we're talking about a game that literally doesn't exist anymore.
And they come from Dark Circus and the emails. Now, I've made a full video on the Dark Circus, which you can watch right here, but in that video I didn't talk about the emails because I wasn't focusing on it. Now it's time. As you play Five Nights at Freddy's Special Delivery, or as you could have played before the game was shut down and unplayable now, Forsaken's pretty good though. You can unlock specific emails that were supposed to stay within Fazbear and their subcontractors. Luckily...
Hey Ness. Oh, it's Lewis. Fun. I hope you're having a good day. It's no big deal, but I want to reach out off the radar and remind you about the company policy about personal internet usage. This is what I was talking about earlier with the whole migration pattern and then severing human limbs of not losing consciousness. Nobody cares if you're online shopping as long as you get your work done. I promise. Damn, that is a great work environment. You can online shop, you can do whatever as long as your work is done. That's great. Where do I sign up? I've done my fair share of last minute gift buying, but certain words and phrases trigger red flag reports, so your last order got automatically sent to me. Basically, anything mentioned torture is going to raise the alarm. So all of the Viking Blood Eagle 12-month calendar you ordered is very cool. Or since you got there did trigger red flag. If you have any questions about the policy, let me know. We could even get coffee or something to avoid. And now I've raised my own flag. Good thing I'm the one who gets the notifications. Okay, Lewis, thanks. Kind of creepy, but it's fine. And Tristan. We've been getting some weird reports here in customer service that I don't really know how to respond to. A handful of our more hardcore users are the service have been reporting service calls from our animatronic that isn't appearing anywhere in our database. Some kind of vintage Bonnie model. A couple of people have mentioned a really bad smell from it as well. It is possible some old school second-hand model someone made to the development rotation.
Even though the game has been shut down, people have already compiled all of these emails along with emails that were never shown to the public, but were probably essentially planned to be, but never ended up getting to be. These emails sort of fall into one of three categories. The first one being emails from Lewis to someone named Ness, whose email is Nessie97. Lewis is in HR, and throughout these emails, it's pretty clear that he has a crush on his coworker named Ness, who we can almost for a fact assume is Vanessa. After all, Lewis implies later that she goes by VA, and she fills in the role of the Vanessa from Security Breach and the Vanessa from Help Wanted very cleanly. By the way, it's these emails that let us know our player from Help Wanted is almost certainly Vanessa. In these emails, it seems that Vanessa is switching between two personalities, one where she's herself and one where she is Vanny, someone we'll get to know in Security Breach, but essentially the part of her mind that is controlled by the anomaly.
And that's why, in the height of Security Breach, whether we're talking about the broken state that game was released at or what have you, but that's why when we get to the whole, patient 46 and, is it 72? Patient 46 and I think it's 70 something, but you know what I'm talking about. When we have the therapist tapes, you have two people who are very distinctly different. One likes dark basements, the other likes the outdoors. One likes candy, the other doesn't. One is very talkative and the other isn't. So everything was pointing to those being complete opposites. So we always thought that was the two sides of personality of Vanessa and Vanny, where one side is the good side that maybe is the one that likes candy, maybe likes the outdoors or whatever. That's Vanessa. But the one that likes dark basements, doesn't like candy or whatever, is Vanny, the dark half of her personality. But as we know, we don't know if that's true anymore. But that's what we always thought.
We also learned that she's behind another set of emails between what we assume to be the Help Wanted team. Corroborating information with what we've heard in the tapes, these emails document when the Help Wanted team originally received the Fazbear technology, scanned it in, and got what they called the virus. It's this strange virus that begins taking over things and making things act differently. We could assume this to be the anomaly from Help Wanted. Luckily, someone from the IT of Fazbear going by V_A comes in and isolates the virus to one location, and then after some time removes the virus. All of the workers are thankful and celebratory, but suddenly get worried when all of their access to their systems have been locked out as well, to the point where they begin emailing from their phone because they can't even log into their computers. So we'll put a pin in there that happened, but that's not all.
Damn it. I want to read that.
Get worried when all of their access
I want to read
that.
That came a little too fast.
Locked out as well, to the point where they begin emailing from their phone because they can't even log into their computers. So we'll put a pin in there.
Vanessa showed signs of her and Vanny switching control while working at her job. Eventually created a fake IT email, VA, to isolate and remove the anomaly virus from the system of the team making the VR game, then locked out of all their access. Yeah, but I know that's something that we hear about. This is not the first time I've heard that, Vanessa used a fake email to, take control of the company and, basically hack into the, system and everything and release the glitch trap virus or whatever. That's not the first time I've heard something like that, but the problem is with the whole fake IT email with Vanessa, the problem with that is it's cut emails. It never was shown to the public. So it's what do you consider cut dialogue or cut text or whatever, right? Because it didn't make the final product for whatever reason. So it's clearly that causes issues. Clearly the developers did not want that to be in the final product. So, can you use that in lore and theories from a time perspective of stuff the developers themselves didn't think was that necessary to put in the final product? That's where you run into issues. It's the same thing with what we were talking about earlier with the whole, oh, Gregory, you're bleeding or whatever. I'm detecting blood, you're cut badly or whatever. That was cut dialogue. So it's do you use cut dialogue in your theories when talking about security breach, or in this case, AR, right? It was made at one point, but it didn't make the final product. So, is that fair game? People to this day still don't know, if you're still able to use cut dialogue and cut emails and stuff like that. All people know is that this series takes place at Freddy Fazbear locations.
That happened, but that's not all. Lewis later tells us more info, and we get an email showing this happening. It's implied this Ness, using VA as a login with the Pizzaplex, inputs the package of this virus into the Pizzaplex system. So when we take a step back, these emails from Special Delivery literally directly tell us how Vanessa got the anomaly into the Pizzaplex system. She pretended to be Fazbear IT and isolated the anomaly from Help Wanted and extracted the virus, and then inputted the virus to the Pizzaplex systems and bypassed the security to get it into the actual computers. And then the anomaly was free to infect the entire Pizzaplex. So put a big old pin in there. Some other information we can get is how we know pretty much for a fact that this VA/Ness is Vanessa, because another email detailing workers, their birthdays, and their favorite cakes lists someone by Vanessa A, age 23, whose favorite cake is bunny-shaped cakes. That's pretty cut and dry. But notably, she's 23, and her username is Nessie97, which implies she was born in 1997. So this also implies these emails are taking place in 2020. That's very important, because a lot of people, and at different times in my life, myself included, have believed FNAF 3 takes place in 2023. After all, it's stated to be on the 30th anniversary, and we're fairly certain FNAF 1 takes place probably around 93. So 1993 plus 30, 2023. However, if these emails take place in 2020, that means FNAF 3 can't take place in 2023. FNAF 3 has to take place a long time before these emails occur. After all, FNAF 3 happens, then FNAF 6 happens, then the whole PR stunt with the indie games happen, then Help Wanted happens, and during Help Wanted and after Help Wanted is when these emails take place. So when does FNAF 3 take place? Well, I think the best runner-up option for us is 2013. We know for a fact that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was established in 1983. That's what the coin says, that's what the TV in FNAF 4 says, it just makes a lot of sense. And if Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened in 1983, then 2013 would be a 30th year anniversary of Freddy Fazbear's. So that wraps it up with a nice bow. FNAF 3 takes place in 2013, and then FNAF 6 can't take place in 2023 either. I, for a long time, assumed FNAF 6 took place in 2023 because the log was HRY223. So like, cool, that's our date, it lines up with FNAF 3. Now it doesn't. So, I mean, maybe that's just the 223rd log that Henry left while doing this. I don't know, but, you know, FNAF 6 takes place sometime in between 2013 and 2020. We'll figure more about that when we think about it.
I think that just comes back to the whole thing about what I said in the introduction of how, you know, we may think that, you know, FNAF 1, you know, based on the paychecks and everything, it has to take place in, you know, 1993. That's when the business was open, because that's when we learned about the paychecks and everything in the game that we play as in real life. But, you know, like I said earlier, that doesn't have to be the case. A restaurant could be open, you know, decades before we play the game as a security guard and get the paychecks and everything. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I think it also comes back to the whole thing about multiple locations can be open at the same time, which is what we hear about in the FNAF 3 tapes. Either night 1 or night 2, where, you know, there was a simultaneous, you know, sprint lock situation, you know, at a sister location, and it shut it down and everything. And then we also learned more about it in the first night, I guess, of sister location, where it's like, you know, fan unit says, like, you know, due to the closure of, you know, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear the stage was set for a new, you know, contender children's entertainment. So obviously, sister location, you know, Baby's Pizza World, whatever you want to say about what location that is. And a Freddy Fazbear location had to have been open at the same time, right? So I think that's what that proves, is multiple locations can be open at the same time, number one. And number two, that what we play as from the paychecks and everything, what years we determine, that doesn't mean that's when the location was open from a time perspective. They could have been open decades before. And we are just now being the security guard and watching things over decades after the thing was already closed, right? We see that in the FNAF 1 movie. We see that in the FNAF 3, you know, 8-bit minigame, where the, you know, not the corrupted, but the invisible bunker that William Afton Springtrap goes into, that's invisible to the animatronics, that area was boarded up. But where did that area come from? Oh, we find out that area boarded up was from an original Freddy Fazbear location. It's not a new building. Okay. So, We've been going for about an hour already, which is crazy. I'm having a lot of fun doing this. I want to do more of these FNAF talkbacks because, as you can see, there's a lot on my mind. There's a lot I can talk about because, yeah, stuff in the FNAF universe, timeline perspective, has taken up my mind for a decade. So now I'm releasing my information and just vomiting it out back out to you. All right, so that is one FNAF theory we have on tap. So let's go to the other. Let's see.
Yes, there are
Go to the other. Okay. So now, let's go to the other. Talking about the books. That is going to be fun because it's not like the books are complicated.
even more Five Nights at Freddy's books, and we're here to talk about them. Today we embark on the journey of chronicling every piece of timeline-relevant lore I can find in the Tales from the Pizzaplex book series. Now, I know that some of you are thinking, well, all of the lore is relevant because these books take place in game, but do they? We're going to have that conversation too. So Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake some literary analysis. You know, it really doesn't have the same ring as theory. So what did I mean by that last remark? Similarly to the Fazbear Frights debate, there's a significant chunk of the fan base that believe all of these stories to not be separate stories, but in fact exactly what happens in the in-game timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's. Especially since in the books it's established there are multiple pizzaplexes, so not all of these stories necessarily need to take place at the same one. The evidence used for the side of the argument that the books are in continuity with the games are typically what Scholastic has said about the books, what Scott has mentioned, and the contents of the books themselves. Scholastic has described these books as taking place within the setting and universe of Five Nights at Freddy's, exploring uncharted corners of the game's canon and things like that. I myself have argued against these lines in the past, and the best way I could explain how is with an analogy. When the Mario movie was coming out, the Universal website promoting the movie described it as a movie that takes place within the setting of the Mario games. And that's a true statement. Those movies take place in the Mario games setting. But nobody would argue that this movie takes place within the same continuity of the Mario games. That doesn't make a lot of sense with what both the games and the movie establish as lore. And that's the key here, because taking place within the same setting as something doesn't mean it takes place within the same continuity. After all, fanfiction takes place within the same setting as its source material, and that's obviously not canon. But to go even more officially, the Silver Eyes, a series of books which everybody pretty much agrees do not take place in the games, do take place in the setting of the games. Five Nights at Freddy's, the characters of Freddy's and Fazbear exist, so do the locations. These are the same settings, but different stories told within them. So what of the content?
Yes, totally agree. And can we put this up for a second? Hold up. Hold up just a second. There's something I want to pull up to further prove my point. Hold on one second. Can we pull it up? Can we find the image? Oh man, I want to find the post by Scott. Oh, here we go. Hold up. Okay. So we just pulled this up. All right, let me see if I can put it on screen. Hold on one second. Sorry, I know, professional streamer here. Image. Here we go. All right. Sorry, I have to cover your face for a second. Okay. So I hope y'all can see that. So get into the book thing for a second. So, first of all, as you can see, this is by Scott Cawthon. Cawthon. Sorry, I'm just joking. I'm just dicking around. But no, this is by Scott, the developer, the person who made the FNAF series what we know as. He's the creator. He's the guy. So when he says something, for the most part, unless he's trolling around, you have to take it as the gospel because, well, he's obviously going to know more than anybody. So when the original trilogy of the books came out, this was after FNAF 4. This is between FNAF 4 and Sister Location being released in like 2014, 2015, that range. So we had the original 3 books, the Silver Eyes, the Twisted Ones, and the Fourth Closet. Fourth Closet has gotten really interesting nowadays with what the series has turned into. But this was asked when the Silver Eyes, the first book of the series, came out. And people were asking, oh, was the book canon? Because, well, the FNAF universe lore theories, they was kind of popular back then. So everyone's like, any FNAF content we saw, whether it was games or books or teaser images, cut dialogue, cut source code, anything we saw from Scott with FNAF, we saw as 100% canon. So with the books, people are asking, oh, are the books canon, whatever. So he says, and I quote, I'm not going to say any Scott voice because I can't do that. I mean, have y'all heard me do voices before? You haven't looked at my Doki streams. Is the book canon? I want to talk about this a little bit to put everyone's minds at ease. I've gotten a lot of emails, even angry ones, complaining that the book doesn't match up with one or more of the games. Even some of the reviews on Amazon chastise the book for not matching the games. Something that I should have explained very early on is that the book is not intended to solve anything. It's not intended to be a guide for the games or fill in gaps. The games are what they are. As stated before, that story is finished. Is it? Is it though, Scott? He says 2015, a decade later, and it's still not finished. Something I said in one of the forum threads about this is that sometimes the lore of something can become so crowded that you can't tell an original story anymore. The games and the books should be considered to be separate continuities, even if they do share many familiar elements. So yes, the book is canon just as the games are. That doesn't mean that they are intended to fit together like 2 puzzle pieces. I would actually ask anyone wanting to read the book, even if you are a devout fan of the games, to read the book for the sake of enjoying the book and don't try to solve anything. The book is reimagining the Five Nights at Freddy's story, and if you go with that mindset, I think you'll really enjoy it. So that is straight from the creator's mouth of the games and the books, that the book may take place in the same universe. Like, yeah, it does have, Freddy Fazbear, elements and everything. Maybe the characters are the same, but that doesn't mean it's a direct one-to-one parallel, right? A Freddy Fazbear you see in the books is not the same Freddy Fazbear you see in the FNAF 1 location that we play as in the games, right? But obviously, it's still Freddy Fazbear, it's still the same character, but it's not the exact one-to-one kind of thing. So that's what maybe people think it's a, alternate universe, but to me, this is how I've taken the books. This is how I look at the books when I come to, think about theories and timelines and trying to, quote, solve the lore, try to solve the story, is how I've viewed. Also, we can get rid of this image since we are done reading that. Okay. So, how I viewed the story is very simple, right? I don't look at the books as a one-to-one comparison where it's like, if it happens in the books, it must be true, right? I think the books, this goes for the trilogy, this goes for the Tales of the Pizzaplets, this goes for the Fazbear Frights books, this goes for the new series of books that Scott makes, where there's like 20 more of them, I'm sure. But how I've always viewed the books is, it's all about giving you interesting ideas, right? Mention something that's very oddly specific, and you're like, I never thought of it like that. That's very interesting, right? It gets your mind, your cogs turning, like, that's an interesting way of thinking about this. Maybe that has some game implications, but I'm not like, oh my god, this changes how I view the entire series or anything, right? Because, like one example, that I bring up, I think I'm repeating myself on this, but I'll say this again since we're talking about the books, is the example I always give is how Plush Trap is treated, right? Because in the books, Plush Trap is this like, stuffed animal figure you buy at the store, and you shine your light at him, and he stops in his tracks. And the Plush Trap that happens in the books in the story, he has like human eyes, he has like human teeth, and he like bites through like metal. He's able to bite through anything, and the story ends by the kids luring that humanoid Plush Trap to a railroad, shine the light on him so a train runs over the Plush Trap and kills him. Now, is that the exact same one-to-one Plush Trap that we see in the Fun with Plush Trap minigame in Fnaf 4 and later on in VR Help 1-1? No, it's not. There is no human teeth on that Plush Trap in the game. There is no human eyes. But there is a Plush Trap you play in the games. The whole point of the game is to shine a flashlight to cause him to stop in his tracks. But it's not an exact one-to-one thing. It's just it shares some elements where like, that's just another way of interpreting that's how we saw the minigame, right? So that's the first thing I think about, is that's just another way of interpreting what we see in games and just putting it as a new perspective, right? So that's the first way I think about the games, or the books with the games, is that. The second way I think of is that has not showed up in the games. That's very interesting. So let me hold on to that idea. And if it shows up in the games, then it's more real. It's more canon, so to speak. Like, for instance, in the original trilogy books, I want to say it was in the Twisted ones, the second one, where they realize that in the pizzeria location, they go down underneath the building. I think they go into like a trapdoor or something, and they see that there's a waterfall. There is glowing mushrooms. William Afton in his yellow Springlock Golden Bonnie suit is trapped down there and everything, and just hiding out. And I think he kills the kids, if I remember correctly. I think he kills the kids who go down in the bunker, but that happens in the books. And I'm like, that's very interesting. We have not seen that in the games. Until in Security Breach Ruin, we see when Cassie goes down further and further underneath the Pizza Pletz and goes under the FNAF 6 location, they get to a point where they see a waterfall with glowing mushrooms. There was no William Afton there. There was the Mimic there. But, that's very oddly specific. A waterfall, glowing mushrooms, has to be calling back to the books. So, how I see the books as either gives you a new perspective of something we already saw in the games, like, that's interesting to think about. That's another way I would see that. Or, it gives you an idea like, we haven't seen that in the games, but if it's seen in the games later on, then 100% that is canon. Those are my interpretations of the books, and that's how I've always seen the books. I feel like that's how, you can look at the books however you want, whether you think it's canon or not. It's up to you, your own theories, your own timeline. But I just think if you treat the books as gospel, you'll constantly run into a lot of plot holes, because a lot of the books, a lot of the details that we learn about are contradictions from what we learn about in the games, right? Like, for instance, in the books, Baby technically has she has blackish, I think it's blood tentacles coming out of her mouth, her fingers, her stomach, and everything. She has tentacles. Well, is that the same as the baby we see in the games like Sister Location or like FNAF VR? No, we haven't seen any baby with tentacles coming out ever. So I feel like if you treat the books as 100% canon and then treat the books as a first thought, then games everything else as the secondary information, then you constantly run into holes where it's like, okay, well, what is true anymore? That's just my opinion. Anyway, let's move on. Spiel aside, I just wanted to pull up that Steam post because, yeah, the book's confusing of what is real, what's not. Is it canon, or is it just an idea that just makes you think?
Itself. Well, much of the argument comes from the fact that there are one-to-one locations that carry over from book to game, and that there are characters from the books that carry over one-to-one as well, namely Gregory and the Mimic. Many people argue that since these locations and characters line up so exactly with the games, they might as well be considered to be in the same continuity. And that's a valid argument. I totally understand the camp of people who believe these books to be in the same continuity of the games. It does make a lot of sense, regardless of what I think. So with all this debate, what has Scott said on the matter? Of course, a whole bunch of nothing. In fact, within the past few months, somebody faked an email from Scott Cawthon confirming the books to be in continuity, which then prompted to have Scott come onto the internet on that Reddit post and leave a comment. He confirmed that the email was fake and then continued with, concerning what people have been saying about the canonicity of the books, yes, that is correct. A classic Scott troll. Literally, everyone was saying, I think the books are in continuity, I think the books are not in continuity. And Scott said, referring to what everyone is saying, yes. Thanks, Scott. Gloriously unhelpful as always. So, regardless of where you land on this, what actually changes in the timeline if these books are in continuity 100%? Well, there are some dates that get weird and don't line up super well, but the main changes to the timeline itself, if the books are in continuity, would be that the Mimic's kill count is higher than we see in game, and that Edwin Murray created the Mimic. And other than that, I can't see a lot of direct changes to the timeline if the books are in continuity. So, going into this, where do I land? What do I think of these books and how they can help us solve the FNAF timeline? Personally, I do not think there's compelling enough evidence to definitively say these books are within the same continuity of the games, and I don't feel comfortable making that claim. So personally, I'm going to treat the Pizzaplex books the same way that we treated Fazbear Frights, and to an extent the Silver Eyes. I'm not taking these stories as direct things that happened in game, but rather, these stories are meant to inform us about things that could have happened in the same universe, and teach us about some characters that may cross over. So let's get to it, and there's a lot of short stories in this series, and previously, when we did Fazbear Frights and Tales from the Pizzaplex, I just kind of pointed out the main issues of lore from those books and moved on. The nature of these stories kind of make it easier if I just briefly go over each story that seems relevant, and I'll pin things as we go. But judging from the length this video is probably going to be, it's going to be a two-parter. So in this part of this little mini-series and a mini-series, we'll be going over every non-Mimic story in Tales from the Pizzaplex. So all of the other things these books teach us about, because a big majority of these books is focused on the Mimic. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, I've got terrible news for you. You're not going to learn today. And one more note before we get into it. When I did the lore videos for the Silver Eyes and Fazbear Frights, I kind of forgot to do the lore corkboard, or as I'll be calling it going forward, the lorkboard. So here's the lorkboard. Here's
Hashtag lorkboard. Hold on, let me do that in chat. There we go.
the Silver Eyes and Fazbear Frights. Now we can start doing Tales from the Pizzaplex. And one final PS, not all the stories are going to be mentioned from Tales from the Pizzaplex because some of them are just not relevant to the timeline. Perfect example, Bleeding Heart. Disgusting story, really gross, very weird. Not super important to the timeline, I'm not gonna bring it up. Okay, finally, let's get into the stories. On the top of the list is Frailty, a story about a girl who has a silver locket that she scrapes metal off of onto hospital patients to make them feel better. But in the end, she loses the locket and turns into a pile of scrap metal and grease. Does this sound familiar? This story is incredibly similar to To Be Beautiful. The lockets are described in a very similar way, they function in a similar way, and some people think Eleanor might have been the one to give this locket to our main character, even though as far as I'm aware, Eleanor does not show up in this story at all. But to be fair, our character does seem to be afraid of a junkyard. But is that because she found Eleanor in one, or because she knows she's made of junk metal? Who knows? Regardless, The locket is definitely made of Remnant, and this story doubles down on the idea that Remnant possesses healing properties. The next story, Under Construction, doesn't have any specific moments, but it sets up a very specific recurring theme that we see in many of these stories. That being the theme of somebody's consciousness being trapped within technology. It seems as though in these stories, when somebody dies inside of an AR or VR machine, their consciousness tends to live on, at least in some way, for some time. Really quickly, in this story, our main character enters a VR machine that essentially gives her the perfect birthday party ever, but when she leaves, what she doesn't know and what we find out later, she's still in the machine. So she goes to live her life still in this machine, and more adults start getting cancer, and more people start giving birth to these weird amorphous blob things. And after a while, she realizes she might be in a machine, but as she's trying to get out of it, more and more of these blobs keep following her and surrounding her until eventually she suffocates underneath them, but she doesn't die. She ends the story wondering how long it'll be until she dies. And in a separate story, we learn that this machine filled up with smoke because it wasn't finished, it was still under construction. So she probably died from suffocation of that smoke, and that's why she was dying in game. But in the game, she hasn't died yet. So again, this story very early establishes even if your body dies, as long as you're in some kind of VR or AR device, your consciousness may live on. And it's worth noting at the beginning of the story, one of the characters calls something like this quantum immortality. So we'll put a pin in there because that's probably definitely important.
That's interesting, because my mind immediately goes to, oh, if your consciousness is tied to like a headset or whatever, you may die, but you can still live on it. Then my mind immediately goes to Jeremy that we seen earlier on the stream and everything, where his Halloween mask and his ink, but I still believe it's his head and blood. But you know what? If you don't think so, that's totally fine. But that makes sense of why he still had the VR mask on, right? Because he can still live on everything like we just saw in the books. But also makes sense from a perspective of, if we are to be believed that the person we play as in VR Help Wanted 2 is the Bonnie Bully from the Fnaf 4 minigame, apparently, if we go off the Fnaf 6 Graveside ending, the person who possesses Bonnie is Jeremy. So that's what makes people believe that Jeremy, the person that we see, or we hear talked about how we sliced his face with the guillotine slicer and everything, could be the same Jeremy we play as in VR Help Wanted 2. Which it makes sense because he would have a history and he would know what glitch trap is. Which is what happens in one of the endings where he, sees the VAD power chamber open that we see in Cicada Breach. You see it open, we see the fingers of glitch trap, and then all surrounding us, the player, is the Nightmare own corrupted staff bots.
Next story, Help Wanted, is a crazy story because it's pretty much exactly the story of how Help Wanted as a game was created, or at least how the indie games that inspired Help Wanted were created. Essentially, this story sees Fazbear gaslighting a man into working for their company, making games based off of the things that may or may not have happened at Fazbear, and then they kill him at the end of the story. So how do they do this? Well, it's very interesting, and we see another version of it at the end of these stories in Didophobia. But we don't get exact information. What we do get is that he is in a house controlled by Fazbear, with robots on tracks and scary things and trapdoors and strings to emulate a sort of life for him and emulate these horrible nightmares. The thing is, obviously no one would be tricked by that, but it's established that there's some kind of thing making these things feel real. And a big central point of that is the smoke detector that he eventually breaks, and that's when he sees the illusion. It's interesting that this story sort of preludes Didophobia. We'll get into more details when we get to that story, but essentially in Didophobia, the main character is having hallucinations based off of real mannequins because of hallucinogenic gas coming from the ceiling. And we look at this, if a smoke detector is on your ceiling, that's a perfect place to vent in gas if it's not a real smoke detector. Regardless, the main information for the timeline here is twofold. One, Fazbear has the technology of either illusion discs, hallucinogenic gas, or probably both. And two, the indie dev they hired to make these games, they tricked into doing so with this technology and then killed him when he was done, or when he found out too much. And before we move on, I have an old friend that I found in storage the other day. Frebby.
Yeah. Because that's another, I guess, angle interpretation of what we believe to know what FNAF 4 is, right? Because we always thought it was, no, it's actual nightmares. Like, those are actual horrific animatronics. And then it turned to, no, it's, hallucinations because, it's, the final moments of, your, life and everything before you hear the hospital monitor, the hospital heart rate monitor flatline everything. That's why you see the IV, the pills, the flowers on the bed and everything, right? So that's where the horrific nightmares come from. Somebody believed at some point it was the Sun Illusion discs were at work. Well, now it seems like the interpretation of why the FNAF 4 animatronics look so horrific and everything is not because of hallucinations like Sound Illusion discs. It's not because gas being pumped into the bedroom to make experiments, right? That's why people believe that, in the secret bunker room in this location, it's William Afton checking in on Michael Afton in that bedroom in the security cameras and seeing how those experiments with the gas work on people.
Is back, baby. The next story is Pressure, which is a wild story again because it features a roleplay section of the Pizzaplex that reenacts the horrible allegations against Fazbear. And at this point, even if I'm just a customer in this universe and Fazbear didn't do all these horrible allegations, at this point I just think they did because they are so open about it. Notably, this story, the kids are doing a reenactment of the Fazbear Frights location of FNAF 3, and one of them has to play Springtrap. And it's revealed that one of the creepy workers replaced the costume of Springtrap with a real Springlock suit, so then he could use the costume to go, kill a kid or something. So for one, Fazbear is doubling and tripling down on saying, hey, these are fake allegations, but let's embrace them, which is a weird thing to do. But two, where the fuck does this Springtrap actual Springlock suit come from? Why does some random Pizzaplex worker named fucking Earl have the actual Springlock suit for Springtrap? Or at least a recreation of it that is a Springlock suit. I know there are Springlock suits at the Pizzaplex according to these stories, but one that looks like Springtrap is crazy. Bobby Dots Part 1 is a very important story for those who argue that these books are within
Interesting. The only thing that comes to mind, I don't know if this is true or anything, but the only time we hear about in this entire series of a Springlock suit being taken is in FNAF 3. It was either in Night 4 or the Night 5 cassette tape where it's there's been a Spring Bonnie suit that was taken and this suit is not safe to be worn and everything. Don't put it on because the Springlocks will, kill you if there's moisture or whatever, as we know. I don't know if that's the exact interpretation that we should be thinking about because, you could always assume that, the Springlock suit was being taken because, William Afton put it on to go, kidnap and later on murder kids and stuff them in the suits, right? So I don't know, but that's just the one little point that I thought about that I'm saying to you as well, that the only time we hear about a Springlock suit being taken and Fazbear every time we worried about, oh my god, it's been taken, everything, they're not safe to be worn, is that moment.
Continuity, because this story and its follow-up feature a lot of direct locations from the games, and that's part of the ammunition for that argument. But because it tells us so much about these locations, it's also worth bringing up here. For instance, it gives us the explanation that Sun and Moon were not the original daycare attendants, but were rather part of a stage performance, and they were shifted there to become the daycare attendant. And the reason the generators are in the daycare is to keep the power on, and the structures were already there, so they just threw the generators in the play structures, and I'm sure OSHA has no problems with that. They do. The next one is GGY, and it's a massive one because it goes into the backstory of everyone's favorite problem child, Gregory. Essentially, this story follows a child who is looking into this mystery centering around an arcade player going by the moniker of GGY. And after doing some more digging, he finds out that the animatronics themselves have had their codes adjusted, and the new code has G's and Y's all throughout it. So whoever this is very important. And eventually, Gregory, or Greg as we see in the story, ends up killing this kid who's been looking really into what GGY is doing. In this story, it is exceedingly clear that Gregory is under the control of Glitchtrap. He calls himself the wizard's favorite apprentice. He goes by the codename Dr. Rabbit. So it seems like this story is telling us that Patient 46 from Security Breach is Gregory, the therapy patient who was killing off therapists and seemed just pretty evil. Another thing worth noting is that if this story is correct, Gregory personally modified the codes of the animatronics. Nexi,
which is so weird. The whole GGY story is so weird, right? You know, I mean, who else would be the GGY other than Gregory we see in Security Breach? How all the arcade minigames, he has the top score because it says GGY, and well, the person's name in the book is Greg. Well, it doesn't take rocket science to say Greg is the same as Gregory. And it's Patient 46. He's this, master hacker. He kills therapists who are, getting too close to the truth about learning about William Afton's, horrible deeds with, Glitchtrap and Burntrap and all that stuff. He kills therapists who get too close to the truth. But yeah, that whole thing about personally editing the animatronics code is so, I don't know, it's so weird to me, right? He personally edited the animatronics, Monty, Rotzi, and Chica. He personally edited their code to be more aggressive, but it was edited aggressive against him, right? The animatronics were not aggressive towards him until he manipulated the code for them to be aggressive to him, which, why would you do that? Why would you manipulate code for animatronics to be aggressive toward you? And that's what we play as in the game. We're trying to hide from these animatronics, but they weren't aggressive until you manipulated the code for them to be that way. It's very weird.
A story isn't incredibly important, but it does bring up a pretty interesting topic. If you want to know what the story is about, just go watch Ron's Gone Wrong. I'm not saying it's plagiarized or anything, but it's crazy how similar these stories are. Anyway, I bring up this story because it's an example of an animatronic trying to become human. Essentially, the Nexi doll wants to look beautiful and perfect and doesn't. So it keeps begging the main character, Astrid, to fix her and make her look nicer, but eventually, she begs Astrid to go to the Pizzaplex extra parts room and get all the parts necessary to make Nexi perfect. And they build basically a full new endoskeleton. And once they do, it's implied that Nexi kills Astrid, puts Astrid's body over the perfect endoskeleton, and then Nexi implants her own programming into that endoskeleton. So she can be the perfect, beautiful girl. So again, I mainly bring this up for the point of recurring theme that animatronics want to become human. Drowning as a story has two things worth bringing up. One, it again doubles down on the idea of a character seemingly continuing to live in a VR game after their body has died. It's a little unclear on the timeline here, and it does seem like she dies at the end of the story in both the game and in real life, but there's a possibility here that her body dies immediately, but her consciousness is trapped for a long time. The other thing worth bringing up is that some people theorize the girl from Drowning, the ghost girl, the spirit who's trying to kill this main character, could be Cassidy. Admittedly, there's not a lot of evidence for this. The main topics that get brought up is that she's loosely compared to a princess, kind of, and that she's a girl associated with Drowning, the only other one we have being Cassidy. But if you want more information on why that is possible, just refer to the back half of this video.
It's a myth. I would say that's myths. Because, yes, no, 100%. Cassidy is linked to Drowning, which is weird. We don't know how Cassidy died. All we know is William Afton apparently went way overboard and got way too aggressive with how he killed Cassidy, which is why Cassidy was a vengeful spirit trying to be linked to Afton, because trying to get revenge because, you know, all these other kids you killed were just fine, but you just so happen, why did I have to be the unlucky one to, you know, get way more aggressive and way more brutal against? We don't know if it was drowning or if it was something else, but yeah, Cassidy with the whole old man consequences stuff with FNAF World, but mainly in Ultimate Custom Night, being linked to drowning and the pond, yeah, 100%. I can see that be linked to Cassidy. Now, the thing is, the whole color thing with the green. To me, that's not Cassidy. Because for as much, you know, changes and, you know, flipping narratives and, you know, having this one idea, then flipping to something else, and how confusing the books get, there is a couple things that have remained constantly consistent with the game. And colors is one of those things. Afton's, but especially William Afton, also Michael Afton as well, but really William Afton is always associated with the color purple. Always. And Charlie, whatever one of the two, it's the same person, is always linked to green. It's the green wristband the puppet is trained to look for in FNAF 6. Leading up to the Ruin DLC, there was a flip inverse on the poster image of one side of the seal logo was purple for William Afton, and the other inverse looking down on it was green, which is Charlotte the puppet. So purple is represented by evil with the Afton, and green is represented by Charlotte the puppet, the good side, trying to stop Afton. So you would think if it's Cassidy, green would not be mentioned because that's not Cassidy's color. They've never been associated with green. But there is a character in the series that's always been associated with green. That's just my one little problem. That's my one little counter.
Next important story worth bringing up is B7 2. I didn't talk about B7 because I don't want to. Frankly, don't want to talk about either of them. But B7 2 is incredibly important to bring up, so we will briefly touch on it. Throughout the story of B7, Billy gets several modifications done to his body to become more like an animatronic, and he eventually kind of maybe dies. But it's revealed in the beginning of B7 2 that he didn't die. He's in fact rescued, and all of those modifications come off of his body in one piece. Billy himself starts doing physical therapy and begins the process of healing and getting some actual prosthetics to replace his missing limbs, but those older modifications still have some sort of consciousness, the consciousness of B7, and they're begging Billy to reattach. Eventually, his grandma falls victim to B7, and B7 begins to try to merge with Billy's grandma until the grandma reveals she knew what was happening all along. She's been talking to B7 over the phone, pretending to not know it's not Billy.
Hey, shout out to Dakota, nice for the look board. Nice. Hashtag look board. I don't know if Dakota, you understand why I said that, but hey, at least you did it.
But knowing that whatever this is wants to hurt Billy. She herself was terminal and was going to die soon anyway. So she forces B7 to finish merging with her and then dies, killing B7 along with herself, essentially using her last dying abilities to kill B7 and save Billy. So why do I bring up this story? Because it establishes a very important rule in this universe, that a consciousness formed within the mind of someone can be separated from that someone and still persist. Think about the implications of this with someone like Vanny. With this story, it could be implied that Vanny can be removed from Vanessa but still exist on its own. Perhaps that's why Princess Quest 4 works the way it does in Help Wanted 2. The idea that maybe Princess Quest 3 was beaten in Security Breach and Vanessa was freed of Vanny, but Vanny wasn't destroyed, and she lay wait in Princess Quest 4 until somebody good enough comes along to take on her persona. Maybe our character in Help Wanted 2 wasn't good enough, and that's why we see the ending we do at the end of Princess Quest 4. I don't know, that's heavy speculation. But as far as lore information, this story establishes that a consciousness can exist separate from the host it was created.
Vanny, I would say, is a good point for that, but I would say another familiar person I think of is with, ironically, we were talking about earlier, but Cassie with Golden Freddy. It's the same thing where, you know, there's been the mindset that, you know, Golden Freddy may possess multiple spirits. You have, you know, Cassie the Vengeful Spirit, the one that wants to, you know, get back at William Afton for murdering them so brutally that they didn't do to other people, right? Other kids. But, you know, on the flip side, another spirit that could possess Golden Freddy is the Fnaf 4 Crown Child, who may or may not be named Evan, right? And the reason why I bring that up is because if we go with that mindset that multiple spirits possess the animatronic, well, it makes sense then, because you could have the FNAF 4 Crown Child spirit in Golden Freddy. You can have that be laid to rest. Whether that was in, you know, FNAF 6 with like the burnt ending, or in maybe FNAF 7 with, you know, customized, or whatever the case may be. You can have the Crying Child spirit in Golden Freddy be laid to rest and be gone, but the vengeful spirit in Cassidy still exists, and they still want to get revenge on William Afton, right? That can still happen.
Our next story is Alone Together, which should sound familiar because I've brought up this story like 10 times on this channel, and I don't want to give another goddamn summary of it, but the point of this video means I probably should. So very briefly, our main character is a boy who nobody likes and nobody wants to talk to, and mostly nobody does talk to. But for his school project, he wants to make a mechanical Turk. It's essentially a wooden box that back in the day was purported to be an automaton that you could play checkers against, but really it was a puppet that somebody was hiding inside of to pretend like it was automaton to play checkers. He's not sure why he's so fascinated about it, but he eventually learns that these memories and wants to build this thing are not his own, but of a ghost that's been possessing him. His grandma tells him that spirits try to affect the memories and dreams of someone to communicate with them. So he hopes that by building this, or by finding the remains of this boy, then maybe, just maybe, he will be able to help this boy move on so he can stop having these visions and these dreams. So he eventually does find the body of the boy inside a mechanical Turk, inside a shed that no one really goes to. He himself then gets trapped, and he realizes that body isn't some boy that's possessing him. That body is his own body. He's dead. And because his remains were undiscovered, he lost the memory of dying. He didn't know he was dead. He was wandering around the places that he spent time in during his life, not realizing that he actually died. But once he finds his body, all of his memories come flooding back, and he's able to find peace. This story is incredibly important for the rules of the universe because it brings up how ghosts seem to work within FNAF. It brings up that wandering spirits can travel through different places they spent while they were alive, not just stay where they died. It brings up that when the body goes undiscovered, a spirit loses its memories and may not even know it's dead. And it brings up that showing a spirit its own remains can help them find peace and possibly move on. So pins for all of that. And finally,
to me, that is a direct callback to how we see Michael Afton, right? Like, as for someone being like, you know, I should be dead and everything, and, you know, they get reminded that, you know, something's wrong and everything. If that is not, we are asking to compare to Michael Afton in that moment, then that is, to me, just cruel and just messed up, because clearly, how else are we as a fan supposed to think about that? Because think about it. Michael Afton is someone who should be dead multiple times, and we question how is he still alive. He, you know, if it's to be believed, he had the FNAF 3 fire. He maybe was the person who was bit, you know, was the Crying Child in FNAF 4. So that's when he should be dead, because you hear the flatline. In this location, he got scooped. So that's when he should be dead. And later on, in that custom night where he's, you know, walking down the street. Can we play that? Hold on, let me see. Let me see if I can play that GIF, because I just think it's funny. Hold on. I just think it's legitimately funny. Okay, well, I see a gif of him walking. Can we get the full thing? Okay, well, we got him vomiting the eyes. So I guess we could do that. Alright. Let's do this. Hold on. I know, professional stream here, ladies and gentlemen. Is it here? I don't see it. Hold up. Man. Ah, damn it. Save image. GIF image, yes. Okay. I think that should work. Browse. Here we go. Alright, well, I think that's the best we're going to do. Okay. And, man, I just lost my train of thought. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah. So, that's just asking us to compare the story as we know with Michael Afton, where, you know, he got burned in the Fnaf 3 fire. If it's to be believed, based on the books and the security log, he's the kid that we play as, or that we see, rather, but we don't play as him, in Fnaf 4, and we see him get bit when he was shoved in the mouth of Fredbear by his older brother in 1983. And then we know he's dead because the, you know, hospital heart rate monitor flatlines. Right? And then in this location, you see him get scooped, so that's when he should be dead. But you also see in this moment, in this location's custom night, where, you know, Michael Afton is, you know, walking down the street, as you do, casually, and his skin goes from being normal to this purple color like you can see. And in the final night, he walks down the hallway. That's not the hallway. He walks on the sidewalk, and he stops because he sees the conglomeration of Ennard and the other Funtime electronics. They, you know, yeet out of his body and go down to the sewer. And that's when he should be dead. But then you hear a baby's voice saying, you know, you won't die, you won't die, you won't die. And Michael Afton rises back up. His eyes go from blackened to open again. And then he walks down the sidewalk like normal. And then, in the cutscene, he is at Fazbear Frights. You hear his voice, and he says, you know, Father, you know, it's me, Michael. I'm looking for you. I should be dead, but I'm not. Right? I can't remember the full dialogue because it goes on for a while, but it's stuff like that. Where it's like he should be dead, but he's not, and he's going to come find his father. And then FNAF 6, we believe we play as Michael Afton in FNAF 6 because, you know, it's the whole family coming, you know, together and everything. You hear the lines from Baby, you hear from William Afton. It seems like it's all the Aftons coming together as one. And that's where we hear about in the Henry's tape and the ending, where it's like, you know, my brave volunteer, there was an exit plan for you, but I feel like that's not what you want. I feel like you're right where you want to be, you know, getting burned with your family in this, you know, big climactic moment in Harry's speech, which is amazing. And then I'm trying to think, is there any other times where we see Michael Afton dead? I can't remember. But that's the point. Like, you see Michael Afton die multiple times in multiple games, but he's still able to come back. He's still able to be alive. He has no idea why he's alive. He says himself that he should be dead, but he's not. So for the books to call attention to this person who should have been dead multiple times over but is still alive because of some spirit, poltergeist or whatever, if that's not asking you to compare to the one character we see that should have been dead ages ago but is still alive, then I don't know what else to tell you. That's just poor planning, in my opinion, if it's not supposed to be Michael Afton.
For the non-mimic stories, we have Didophobia. It's that Fnaf 4 story that I've also made a couple videos about, but essentially, some kid realizes he's in an endless Fnaf 4 nightmare, where he relives the actual game of Fnaf 4 during the night and wanders around his house during the day, eventually to realize that this is all fake and it's mannequins on tracks again, just like Help Wanted. But this time, after doing some exploring, our main character finds out that it's hallucinogenic gas being pumped into his room. And as he keeps exploring the facility, we find that the grander facility he's within is the sister location bunker. Eventually, he tries to escape, but he has to go back into the rooms he was held in to figure out like a better way to get out and maybe a key or something, and he instead hears an intercom that tells him life is better here, and it's honestly better than it was before he was stuck here. And he eventually agrees, turning the machine back on and going back to bed. And we as the reader find out that this intercom isn't even live, but a tape recording that's triggered to replay if he wanders too far. It's a terrible, dreadful, miserable story. But it's great for lore. It introduces the idea of hallucinogenic gas that I mentioned in Help Wanted, so put a pin there for that. And it also introduces the idea that William Afton was doing experiments very much akin to the FNAF 4 game, or that the FNAF 4 game is based off of nightmares from somebody going through the experiments. There's a lot of ways you could square it away, but it's very much worth mentioning that these chambers are linked directly to the sister location bunker. And that's all the stories that don't really have anything to do with the Mimic, or at least are very loosely connected to it. Like, sure, a lot of these stories are because the Mimic is infecting the Pizzaplex. They don't focus on the Mimic was the point. All the really Mimic-focused stories and the epilogues we'll cover next week. Regardless, what do you think of the information we've gathered so far? Anything I miss? I'd love to hear your thoughts below.
Okay, cool. So, those are the two reactions we have on deck, so cool. So, we enter on the 2-hour mark. Reacting to 2 FNAF videos turned into a 2-hour stream, which that just shows you that most of it was just me rambling on and sharing my opinions, my views of stuff that I know from the games, from, the lore, the timeline, my opinions on stuff of, stuff I agree with, stuff I disagree with. So yeah, this was really fun. I definitely want to do more of this in the future because, I'm sure people are going to be making FNAF lore theories forever. Now that I have a PC, I want to make some FNAF theories, that stuff that I've always thought about doing, where like, oh, this is something that I've always, kept on my mind, right? This is a theory that I've always had that no one else has talked about. So I feel like I would want to do FNAF theory videos, but I don't know, maybe at some point. Like, one immediate example is, if I did, one theory that I would want to make is the truth about Midnight Motorist in FNAF 6. To me, I feel like people have been wrong, and I feel like people have been interpreting it wrong, so let me share my own opinion. Let me throw my hat into the FNAF theory ring that I don't know if I'm right, but I feel like there's a lot of evidence for thinking my viewpoint. So maybe I do that video at some point, but at the very minimum, I definitely plan on doing more streams like this, just reacting to other theory videos I find and share my thoughts on it, the stuff I agree with, stuff I disagree with, and stuff that, oh, that's something interesting, let me ramble on for 20 minutes on something that I just thought of. So yeah, this is definitely very fun, so hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.